Welcome. Today we're going to talk about equipment safety, the new home, park and motor angle limits functionality. Now, early in development I had a very rough experience during an overnight imaging session. The Polaris mount began winding cables tightly around my tripod, so tightly in fact that they snapped the dew heater cable and embedded the camera power cable into the primary axis. Fortunately, there were no serious damage to the mount or camera, and a good old soldering iron was enough to fix the cables that had snapped. But it was a wake-up call, and I knew I had ensured that no one else ran into this same issue. Part of the issue is that the Polaris takes the shortest path to target, regardless of how it got there beforehand. And that is why we've added these M1 to M3 motor angles on the dashboard. They show the actual physical rotation from the motor's home position. Unlike the azimuth axis, if you move the azimuth past 360 onwards, it wraps around and it'll go back to zero. But if you watch the motor angle, it doesn't wrap around. It keeps on recording how far the motor has moved from its home position. Another key difference is that these angles of each of the motors is totally independent from one another. If I change only motor 3, notice what's happening to the azimuth and the roll, and even the altitude. All three of those coordinates are changing just with the change of my rotator. So in version 2 of the driver, the home and the park position are quite different than they are in version 1, and they're different than how they operate in the standard Polaris firmware. You can still do an access reset, but it's only available on the Connect page. So the new home functionality no longer looks at azimuth, altitude and roll. What it does when you click it is it will move the motors and it will change the orientation of the mount so that these are all wound back to zero in the opposite direction of how they've moved to the current orientation. So the home takes them back to 0, 0, 0, and if you set up your mount pointing south, that will typically be an azimuth of 180, an altitude of 45 and a roll of 0. Now the park function also doesn't use these coordinates, it uses the motor angles, and by default they'll have a value of 0, 0, 0, so it's the same as the home position, but now you can actually change it and customize it, and you do that from the settings page. Now one thing you can do is you can actually use the diagram over here to move just the motor angles rather than the coordinate system. It makes it a bit easier to get it into an orientation that you want. And what I typically do is I will move the M3 axis so that it has an angle of 90 degrees, I think. Yeah, 90 degrees. That makes it so that it's easy to access the lever and also the tightening knob on the camera mount, around about 90. And I also bring it down so that the motor 2 axis has an angle of minus 45. That way, when I'm mounting and unmounting the camera, I've got it, actually I'll go back a bit further, I've got the plate nice and level. So this orientation I find pretty effective, so I will then click save, and it's updated that park angle for the motor 3, motor 2 and motor 1 angle. So now if I go back to home, it'll drive these values back to 0, 0, 0. And if I go to park, it'll move back into a position that I can easily take the camera on and off. Once it reaches the park location, you'll get this yellow banner, and most of the functions are disabled. If you want to then go and use the mount afterwards, you need to click this button to unpark it. So the other thing we've added to help prevent damage to cables and equipment is the motor angle limits. And what this does is it allows you to define a maximum amount of rotation in each direction for each of the motor angles. So in this case, we have the primary azimuth axis. It can go minus 270 degrees in a anti-clockwise fashion and plus 270 degrees in the opposite direction. Motor axis 2, we allow it to rise up to 37 degrees and come down to minus 55, so it can go a bit below zero. These are trying to show the zero position for the motor angle. It's 45 degrees is the actual zero position for the motor 2 axis. I've changed the motor 3 axis so it's got a limit of 150 to make it easier for us to reach it. So if I keep rotating this, eventually we will hit that limit. You'll get a notification banner and all control to the Polaris will be stopped, so you can actually change the motor, and if it's tracking it will also stop motion to the motor to prevent any further potential twisting of cables. On the banner you can click this review button. It takes you to the settings page and you can look at which alarm limit is being exceeded. Here's the current value of 155. It's greater than the maximum, and it'll give you the option to navigate directly to home, or you see this limit indication on the dashboard. You do need to click the reset button, and this is sort of saying that you're acknowledging that you've hit that limit, and it'll give you 1 minute where you can move the mount and correct it. So we'll go to this page here, and rather than hitting home, we just want to decrease motor 3 and bring it under 150, and once we do that, the alarm banner up the top will disappear and the indication here will say that you're back within the limits of the motor 3 axis. That wraps up the safety measures we've built into version 2.0. Please keep in mind that some failure modes may still be beyond our control, so we strongly advise against operating the Polaris unattended. Thanks for watching. See you next time.